The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of ochre sand and stone under a punishing sun. In every direction the land seemed barren, yet it pulsed with a quiet, dangerous life. Rattlesnakes hiding in crevices, vultures circling high above, and sharp cactus standing like sentinels against the horizon. This was Apache country, a place feared by the settlers pushing ever westward, and yet a place they could not resist. To the settlers, the land meant opportunity. To the Apache, it was home, sacred, and alive. And between those two visions, blood was often spilled. Among the wagons that creaked across this unforgiving landscape was Clara Whitfield, a young woman barely 20 years of age. She was not hardened like the men who drove oxen, nor stoic like the women who had learned to accept hunger and dust as daily companions. Clara carried something different within her, a restlessness that had no proper place in the rigid world of the settlement. Born to a family of strict Protestant farmers in Missouri, she had grown up with duty drilled into her bones. Obey your father, honor your husband, serve God with quiet humility. Yet Clara had always bristled under those expectations, feeling like a bird locked in a wooden cage. The journey westward had been sold to her as adventure, a grand promise of a new beginning. But by the time the caravan crossed into the dry territories, the truth was harsher. The sun burned her skin, water ran short, and food was rationed. Worst of all, the settlers whispered in fear at every shadow on the horizon. To them, the Apache were not people but threats, painted in terrifying strokes of rumor, raiders, killers, merciless ghosts of the desert. Clara listened to these tales in silence, though she could not help but notice the fear behind the men's bravado. The caravan grew weaker with each mile. Wagons broke down, oxen collapsed, and children cried from thirst. Arguments simmered between families. And when the first attack came, from a band of raiders whose identity was never certain, the order of the group dissolved into chaos. The ambush was swift, arrows slicing the air, shouts of terror, oxen scattering into the desert. Clara remembered falling, striking her head against the hard ground as men and women fled in a frenzy. When she regained her senses, the world was eerily quiet, save for the buzz of flies and the low moan of the wind. It was then she realized the truth. The settlers had left her behind. She lay among the wreckage of the wagon, her dress torn, her lips split, blood drying on her temple. Around her, bodies of the less fortunate sprawled motionless, but most of the caravan had escaped, abandoning the wounded in their desperate flight. Clara tried to stand, only to collapse again, her legs trembling. The horizon offered no sign of rescue, only shimmering waves of heat. In that moment, she understood her worth in the eyes of those she had trusted. She was expendable, a burden, something easier to discard than to save. The betrayal cut deeper than her wounds. Clara had been raised to believe in the sanctity of community, that family and faith would not falter even under hardship. Yet here she was, left for dead in a desert that cared nothing for her prayers. She pressed her hands into the sand, feeling its heat scorch her palms, and whispered hoarsely to herself that she would not die here. Not like this. She scavenged what little remained in the broken wagon, a cracked water flask, half empty, a strip of dried meat gnawed nearly to nothing, a shawl to shield herself from the unrelenting sun. Every step she took away from that sight was agony, but every step was also defiance. If her people had abandoned her, then she would carve her own fate from this merciless land. Yet fate often takes forms we cannot imagine. As the sun dipped lower, painting the desert in long shadows, Clara's strength faltered. She stumbled into a dry riverbed, the cracked earth beneath her feet like shattered pottery. Her vision swam. The sky spun. She sank to her knees, clutching the empty flask. In that stillness between waking and darkness, she thought she heard movement above her, a soft tread, cautious but certain. At first she thought it must be a coyote, or worse, the return of raiders. But when she lifted her gaze, blurred though it was, she saw the outline of a man standing at the ridge. His figure was tall, his hair dark against the setting sun, his posture steady, as if he were part of the land itself. Across his back hung a bow, and at his belt glinted a knife. His eyes, though too distant to read, were fixed upon her with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. Clara's heart quickened. Every story she had ever heard told her to fear him. Apache scout, Apache warrior, Apache ghost. It did not matter what word they used, for to the settlers it all meant the same: danger. Yet in her weakened state, she could not flee, nor could she fight. She could only wait, breath shallow, as he descended into the riverbed. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her was a shadow falling across her body and the faint, surprising gentleness of hands lifting her from the dust. Clara awoke to the sensation of water touching her lips. At first, she thought it a dream, the cool liquid slipping past her cracked mouth, easing the fire in her throat. But when her eyes fluttered open, she saw the source. A hand, steady and brown from sun, tipped a gourd against her lips. The man who held it knelt beside her, his face half-shadowed by the wide brim of the sky above. For a heartbeat, terror surged. This was no settler, no familiar face from her caravan. His hair fell long and dark, tied back with a strip of leather. His skin bore the hue of the desert, his clothing fashioned of buckskin and adorned with faint beadwork. A bow and quiver rested nearby, tools as natural to him as her father's plow had once been to their Missouri farm. He was Apache. Clara jerked back instinctively, choking on the water, her limbs trembling with panic. Her breath came ragged, and she tried to scramble away, though her strength barely allowed her to lift an arm. The man did not move toward her. Instead, he waited, calm as the stones of the canyon wall. His dark eyes studied her, not unkindly but unflinchingly, as though measuring whether she was worth the effort of saving. "You will die," he said in halting English, his voice low and firm. The words were accented but clear, carved from patience and certainty. Clara froze. It was not a threat, it was a fact. She could see it in his gaze, the awareness of her weakness, the desert's merciless hunger, and the truth that without him, she would not see another sunrise. "Go," she whispered hoarsely, clutching the empty flask she had carried from the wreckage. "Leave me." He did not. Instead, he poured more water into the gourd and set it beside her. Then he unwrapped a bundle of dried meat and placed it carefully within her reach. His movements were deliberate, neither rushed nor hesitant. When she did not touch the offering, he reached for her wrist. His grip was firm but not cruel, guiding her hand toward the food. Clara flinched, her heart pounding, but the hunger in her belly betrayed her. Slowly, shakily, she tore a bite and chewed, tears stinging her eyes as she swallowed. "Why?" she asked, the word escaping like a child's plea. The man tilted his head slightly, as though puzzled by the question. At last he said, "I find you. Alone. Left." His gaze lingered on her, sharp as an arrowhead. "Your people gone." Shame seared her chest at his bluntness. Yes, she had been abandoned. Yes, she was unwanted by those she had trusted. The reminder cut more deeply than the gash on her temple. "What do you want?" she demanded, summoning what little defiance she could. For the first time, his expression shifted. His mouth, set in a line, curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something closer to acknowledgement. He straightened his posture, as though preparing for a declaration. "In my people's way," he said, "a woman saved from death becomes wife to the man who saves her. I take you." The word struck her like a stone. She stared, unable to breathe. Saved, yes, but claimed? Marriage, spoken so simply, without courtship or consent. Her heart hammered in confusion. "I am not," she began, but the Apache cut her off with a raised hand. "Listen. You stay alone, you die. With me, you live. This is truth." His voice carried no boast, no cruelty, only certainty. "You are mine now." Clara recoiled, horror mingling with helplessness. The settlers' stories rushed back, tales of captivity, of women stolen and forced into lives they never chose. Yet here she was, weak as a newborn lamb, unable to walk a mile without collapsing. Still, there was something in his tone that unsettled her assumptions. He did not leer. He did not gloat. He spoke as though he stated the law of the sun or the movement of rivers. To him, this was not conquest. It was custom. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the low cry of a hawk overhead. Clara's mind whirled. To resist meant death. To submit meant surrendering her freedom. Neither choice was one she wanted. At last she rasped, "What is your name?" The man studied her again, as if weighing whether she had earned the answer. "Taza," he said. "Scout for my people. Hunter of this land." Clara whispered her own name in return, though her voice faltered. "Clara." Taza nodded once, the gesture solemn. Then, without further words, he lifted her easily into his arms. She gasped, clutching his shoulder for balance, too weak to protest. He carried her as one might carry a wounded bird, careful not to crush her yet unyielding in his grip. From the riverbed, he climbed with sure footing, his gaze scanning the horizon for danger. Clara's head rested against his chest despite herself, exhaustion dragging her toward sleep. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath the fabric of his buckskin shirt, strong and unfaltering. Her last thought before drifting into unconsciousness was not of terror, but of bewilderment. The man she had been taught to fear had saved her life, yet bound her to him in a way she had never imagined. When darkness claimed her again, the desert carried only the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance, steady and certain, carrying her toward a fate she could neither escape nor yet understand. Clara awoke the next morning to the smell of smoke and the crackle of fire. For a moment, she thought she had been returned to her family's hearth, but the desert wind sweeping against her face and the strange rhythm of a chant nearby shattered that illusion. Slowly she sat up, wincing as her body protested, and saw Taza crouched near a small fire. He was grinding herbs between two stones, his movements precise, his expression unreadable. The sight of him filled her with unease, yet also with relief. He had not abandoned her. He had made a camp, built a fire, and prepared food. He had kept her alive through the night, when the cold could kill as mercilessly as the sun. When he noticed her stirring, he set aside the herbs and brought her a strip of roasted rabbit. She hesitated, still wary, but hunger gnawed at her resolve. She accepted the meat, her fingers brushing his as she took it. His touch was brief, impersonal, yet steady as stone. "You eat," he said simply. Strength returns. His English was limited, but the intent was clear. Clara ate, each bite a reminder that her survival now rested on this man she barely knew. Days passed, measured not in comfort but in endurance. Taza led her through the desert with the certainty of one who belonged to it. He found water where she saw only dust, plucked roots from beneath thorny shrubs, and read the tracks of animals in ways that seemed more instinct than skill. Clara followed, weak at first, stumbling often, but gradually regaining strength under his watchful eye. In those days, silence often stretched between them. Yet silence was not emptiness. It was filled with the scrape of his knife against wood as he fashioned tools, the distant cries of coyotes, the low hum of his voice when he sang softly to himself in Apache. Clara listened, absorbing what she could not fully understand. For the first time in her life, she learned that words were not always needed for meaning to be shared. Still, fear lingered. At night, when the fire flickered low, she would think of his claim, that saving her bound her as his wife. She had not agreed, had not spoken vows or consent, yet he carried himself as though it were already decided. She wondered if he saw her as a possession, a prize, or something else entirely. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, she dared to voice the question that had haunted her. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why claim me? You could have left me there. You could have walked away." Taza looked up from the arrow he was fletching. His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "In my people's way," he said, "a life saved is a bond, not broken. You live because I choose. Now you are part of my path." His words unsettled her, yet there was no arrogance in them. He did not speak as though she were a trophy, but as though her survival had entwined their fates. Clara's heart ached with conflict. The settlers had abandoned her without hesitation, yet this man, once painted to her as a savage, had carried her, fed her, sheltered her. Gratitude warred with the instinct to resist. As days grew into weeks, Clara began to see more of Taza than the frightening figure she had imagined. She saw how he moved with reverence for the land, pausing to whisper thanks when he hunted an animal, placing tobacco leaves in the earth after drawing water. She saw the scars on his arm, faint but deep, evidence of battles fought to protect his people. She saw the way his eyes softened when they rested on her, even if his words remained few. And she saw her own reflection shifting. No longer the frail girl left for dead, she was learning to walk with steadier steps, to build small fires, to listen to the desert instead of fearing it. She was becoming someone new, someone her family would not recognize. Yet each small step forward deepened the dilemma within her. Could she accept this bond he claimed? Could she belong to him when choice had been taken from her at the start? One night, the stars spread endless across the sky. Clara sat by the fire while Taza cleaned his knife. The flames lit his face in sharp relief, casting shadows that made him appear both fierce and weary. "You think I trap you," he said suddenly, as though reading her unspoken thoughts. His English faltered, but his meaning was clear. "But I give choice. Stay with me, or go when you are strong." Clara's breath caught. She stared at him, searching his eyes for deceit. But there was none. For the first time, she realized the bond he spoke of was not a prison. It was a path offered, not forced. Her heart softened, though fear still lingered. Freedom was a word she had longed for, yet here it came from the most unexpected place, from a man she had been taught to despise. As the fire burned low, Clara lay awake, staring at the stars. She did not yet know what choice she would make, but she knew this much. Her life was no longer bound to the settlers who abandoned her. It was tied now to the scout who had saved her, to a future as uncertain as the desert night. And with that realization came both terror and hope. The days stretched into weeks, and Clara found her body stronger, her spirit steadier. Yet the question Taza had placed before her, stay or go, lingered like a shadow. She had not answered, for she did not know how. The desert had become her world, its harsh beauty imprinted on her senses. She no longer flinched at the cry of coyotes in the distance or shrank from the weight of the sun overhead. But at night, when the fire was low and Taza's steady breathing marked his sleep, she thought of the people who had left her behind. Did they believe her dead? Did they regret? Or had they moved on without a thought? Her answer came sooner than she expected. One morning, while the horizon still shimmered with dawn, Taza stiffened as he scanned the land from a ridge. Clara followed his gaze, squinting against the light, and her breath caught. Far below, dust rose in a line, riders. A caravan of settlers, armed and grim-faced, their wagons groaning across the desert floor. She recognized some of them. Men who had once shared bread at campfires, women who had laughed over chores, children she had comforted. Her heart twisted with longing and rage. "They come," Taza said simply, his tone neither fearful nor surprised. His hand rested lightly on his bow, his eyes narrowed. Clara's pulse raced. A part of her longed to run to them, to announce her survival, to demand answers. Yet another part recoiled, remembering the moment she woke among the abandoned dead. She turned to Taza, who stood like an oak, unmoved by the storm that approached. The settlers noticed them soon enough. Shouts carried across the dry air, and within moments a group of men broke from the main body, galloping hard toward the ridge. Dust billowed behind them as hooves pounded the earth. Clara's throat tightened as they drew closer, her father among them, his face carved from stone, his eyes blazing with something she could not yet read. "Clara," he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. He reined in his horse so sharply it reared, hooves striking the air. "By God above, it's you. You're alive." She stood frozen, caught between the pull of old ties and the solidity of the man beside her. Her father's gaze shifted to Taza, and his expression hardened into fury. "Get away from her, savage. Clara, come here at once." He raised his rifle, leveling it at Taza's chest. Other men followed suit, weapons glinting in the morning sun. Clara's breath seized. She stepped forward instinctively, throwing her body between the barrel of her father's rifle and the steady figure of Taza. "No," she cried. "You will not harm him." Her father's face twisted with shock. "Clara, what madness is this? He's taken you captive. We thought you dead. We mourned you, and now you stand with him." "He saved me," Clara said fiercely, her voice trembling but clear. "When you left me, broken and bleeding, he carried me. He fed me. He gave me life when you had already buried me in your hearts." The words struck like a blow. Murmurs rippled among the men, but her father's jaw only tightened. "You don't understand, girl. Their kind cannot be trusted. He has tricked you, poisoned your mind." Taza stood silent, his bow unraised, though his hand rested near the string. His eyes never left Clara, as though her choice alone mattered. Clara felt the weight of every gaze upon her. The settlers who had abandoned her now clamored to reclaim her, not out of love but out of pride, fear, and possession. The scout who had saved her did not demand. He simply waited, offering strength without chains. For the first time in her life, she realized the truth. Freedom was not given by birth or by family. It was seized in the moment one chose for themselves. "I am not your property," Clara said, turning to face her father fully. Her voice shook, but she did not waver. "You left me. You made your choice. Now I make mine." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the restless snort of horses. Her father's eyes burned, but behind the fury was something else. Shame, perhaps, or the dawning realization that she was no longer the obedient daughter he had known. "You would throw away your people for him?" He spat, his voice hoarse. "I would choose life," Clara replied. "I would choose respect. And I would choose the one who did not turn from me when all others did." Taza stepped closer then, not to claim, but to stand beside her. His presence was a wall of calm strength, a living reminder of the bond forged in dust and fire. The settlers shifted uneasily. Their weapons wavered, but none fired. At last, Clara's father lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the desert itself pressed him down. Without another word, he wheeled his horse and rode back toward the wagons. The others followed, their voices muttering with confusion and disapproval. Within minutes, the cloud of dust moved away, leaving Clara and Taza alone once more on the ridge. The silence that followed was vast, filled with the sigh of wind through sparse grass. Clara's knees threatened to buckle, but Taza's hand steadied her. His touch was no longer unfamiliar, it was anchor and promise both. "You choose," he said quietly, his dark eyes searching hers. "Now it is real." Clara drew a deep breath. The fear that had once gripped her heart loosened, replaced by a steady resolve. She looked out over the desert, endless and unforgiving, yet strangely beautiful. It was not the land of her birth, but it was the land of her rebirth. "I choose," she whispered, meeting his gaze. "And I choose you." Taza inclined his head, solemn, as though honoring her words with ceremony. For the first time, Clara thought she saw a hint of softness in his features, a quiet relief hidden beneath the warrior's calm. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, they sat together by the fire. The desert stretched around them, vast and eternal, yet no longer empty. Clara knew trials awaited them, distrust from settlers, hardships of survival, the uncertainty of two worlds colliding. But she also knew this: her future would not be dictated by abandonment or fear. It would be forged in choice, in loyalty, in the courage to claim her own path. The moral was clear, though hard one. Love and belonging are not given by birthright or forced by custom. They are earned, tested, and chosen in the crucible of hardship. Clara had been left for dead, but in that abandonment, she had found the chance to live fully, fiercely and freely. And with Taza beside her, she stepped into that future without looking back.